we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Not live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for joining me. And like I said, this is not live this week. This is a pre-recorded show. I'm actually at Arkansas RPG Con in Benton on this fine Saturday, October the 21st. So this, don't try to call in or tweet or anything during the show. Won't be able to respond. Whether you're listening Saturday, October the 21st on 99.5, or if you're listening on Sunday, October 22nd on 96.5 at 5 p.m., or if you're listening by podcast or Krypton Radio, I'm just glad to have you. Thanks so much again for listening. I love all my listeners and I appreciate you very much. So, reminder, there is a station change going on through November 11th due to Ouachita Baptist football. And so for starting October 7th through November 11th, I'm broadcasting at my normal time. However, I'm on sister station 99.5 Faith Talk instead of my home station of 96.5 FM The Answer. And then we're rebroadcasting the show on Sundays at 5 p.m. on 96.5 FM The Answer. So, and if you're discovering the show for the first time because of the station change, then hey, come along for the ride. It's a lot of geeky fun. And if you're like, whoa, what's up with the normal programming? Then it'll all be back to normal as of November 11th. So I wanted to throw out some other notes here, some housekeeping notes, the show notes and whatnot. If you're listening to the podcast or Krypton Radio version of this show, will be up at shaneplays.com. Last week's show is archived on the blog and in other areas. We talked with Carl Heil, and so DM Carl and DM Crispy of the Save or Die podcast. We were talking about old school Renaissance or OSR gaming, and there will actually be a lot of that happening today at the Arkansas RPG Con. The podcast does go out a few days after the broadcast on the radio, and it'll go out on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, and more. And last but never least, Shane Plays is also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is SciFi for your Wi-Fi, kryptonradio.com. And we're played a week delayed on Saturdays and Mondays on Krypton Radio. And it looks like next week the show is scheduled to be a Star Trek Discovery show. We'll probably talk about the Orville as well. And Gene Turnbow, who runs Krypton Radio, is of course a big Trek fan, and he's going to try to make the show next week if he can. We'll have a panel talking about Star Trek Discovery. I personally have not made a big secret. I'm not a big fan of Star Trek Discovery, but we'll try to have an even-handed discussion with it with a panel. So today's show is going to be a little bit different. I'm pre-recording, and I wanted to get a few things in the mix. I'm calling today's show an all-you-can-geek buffet. So we're going to have a lot of news items. Then I'm going to have an interview with a shorter interview than normal with Douglas Cole. He was on a few weeks back from Gaming Ballistic when he was doing his Dungeon Grappling Kickstarter. He has another Kickstarter for a adventure module for 5e that he's putting out. And then we'll wrap the show with J.R.R. Tolkien himself. Some people say Tolkien, I say Tolkien, reading from The Hobbit in his own voice and words, the part of the Riddles in the Dark. So that's how we'll end the show. So make sure to stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun throughout the show. Like I said, it's an all-you-can-geek buffet. But first, the news. Now, normally this is the part where Zach would turn on the super secret microphone, but I'll turn on the super secret microphone and see what's going on in the newsroom. There they go, working hard. Sal and his news team. Well, they don't mess around. And I guess Sal and his grandmother and her dog Muffin, they're going to have to be upset because I don't get to banter with Zach this week. So we got a lot of news this week. So I just want to kind of jump right into it. This is via bleedingcool.com. All-Star Comics number 8, which is the first Wonder Woman, has sold for a record $936,223. And it was graded at a 9.4. So that was the grade that it received, and that's sold on eBay. So that is, it's record setting for Wonder Woman. I think, of course, the first Batman and Detective Comics and the first Superman and Action Comics, I think, have sold for more than that. Yeah, to compare that, Action Comics #1, which is the first Superman, has sold for over 3 million in August 2014, and Detective Comics, which is the first Batman, has sold for over 1 million, and that was February 2010. There you go. And Wonder Woman #1, not All Star Comics #8, but Wonder Woman #1 has sold for $291,000 in December 2016. So, and if you're curious why Detective Comics #27, which is the first appearance of Batman, has sold for less than the first appearance of Superman, which is Action Comics #1, you have to remember that even though it could be argued that the Batman is a more popular character than Superman, although I personally like them both, Action Comics #1 was not only the first appearance of Superman, but it's basically the first appearance of a superhero in comics, even though you had like kind of pulp adventures before that. So good on you, Wonder Woman. Not only did your movie do extremely well, but now you're selling some comic book, or your first appearance is going up the charts. So good for you. It's a good time to be Wonder Woman. Now, have another sort of superhero and woman related story here, and this ties into an old personal favorite of mine, nostalgia wise. In the 80s, you had The Greatest American Hero, and it's coming back, and this is this news item's courtesy IO9. So The Greatest American Hero is coming back with an Indian American heroine, and I think I said this is courtesy IO9, but I just want to make sure. I always like to credit the news sources. So based on the headline, you might think, because I've said in the past, why you're replacing all our characters with different stuff and blah, blah, blah. It's actually, it doesn't bother me a bit that they're going to have not only a woman, but Indian American in the lead role. What bugs me actually about this is it's going to be a half-hour single camera sitcom. And it's ABC has given it a pilot deal, which means it will air at least the first episode. The first Greatest American Hero, and they've tried to relaunch this a few times. If you don't know, it's one of my favorite shows. This guy, just a average dude, gets a super suit from aliens, and he promptly loses the instruction book. So he has to learn how to use this super suit that has all these crazy, flight, invulnerability, I think some telekinesis, some invisibility. There's all these different powers in it, and he kind of gets better as he goes along, but he doesn't have the instruction manual. And while there are comedic elements, it also told some pretty serious stories. One of the best is when Hillman, his FBI agent partner Bill Maxwell, have to stop a rogue general from launching missiles and starting World War III. So to see this rebooted as a half-hour single camera sitcom kind of bums me out a little bit, but I'll give it a chance. I mean, the basic premise of The Greatest American Hero is good. You get this super suit, you don't know how to use it, and off we go. So hopefully, they'll do some good things with it. Now, trying to see here, I don't think we have a date yet on when we'll get to see the pilot. The version, according to the article, has the same basic premise as the original, except that the lead character is Mira, a 30-year-old Indian American woman from Cleveland whose talents include tequila drinking and karaoke and not much else. So there we go. I guess she will learn to be a hero. Next, more comic book news, and we've got other news besides comic book news, but right now I think we have one more comic book news item after this. Chuck Dixon is evidently the most published comic book writer of all time. And this is, again, from Bleeding Cool. If you don't follow Bleeding Cool, I recommend it. If you want comic book news, they're doing a great job with comic book news right now. But Chuck Dixon, who's been writing comic books for a long time and for a while was just writing a ton of Batman in the 90s. In fact, he was involved with the storyline where Batman got his back broken. I cannot believe I'm forgetting the name of that storyline. And he also was one of the creators, or a co-creator of the character Bane, who broke the Batman's back and has gone on to be a pretty popular character in his own right. So anyway, as of September 6th, I guess Chuck made a Facebook post that said that on September 6th, DC Comics publishes Bane Conquest number 5. So that's happened, about 6 weeks ago, by Bane creators Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan. At that point, Dixon states he will be the most prolific comic book writer of all time, with a total surpassing 40,000 pages, according to his statistician, Jared Mitchell, which, and this would, if accurate, he will pass the record previously held by Paul S. Newman, who is currently recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific comic book writer of all time. Now, I went and looked up Paul S. Newman. I have to be honest, I wasn't familiar with him, but he wrote a lot of Turok, the Dinosaur Hunter. He wrote a lot of those comic books and I think some Gold Key stuff, if I'm not, I think that's what Turok was. And I know he looks like he did some Solar, Man in the Atom and that sort of thing. So anyway, Chuck, if you're listening, congratulations. And I hope that that statistic proves true. It says that Paul S. Newman is supposedly the most prolific comic book writer, recording over 4,100 published stories, totaling about 36,000 pages. And evidently, according to the statistics, that Chuck Dixon will be at 40,000 pages. So anyway, the race goes on and on to be the most prolific comic book writer out there. I guarantee that by the end of this decade, we will have a comic book writer doing 80,000 pages. We will show those other comic book writers that we are the best. So there we go. The comic book writer race continues. Now, last comic book news item here, and this is good. It's, a lot of times we hear, it's the end of the industry and video games and TV, they're going to get rid of comic books. Well, I got news for you. TV's been around for decades and video games have been around since the 80s, and we still have comic books. So now that, the demographics have changed some and the way you buy your comic books has changed some, I still lament the fact that you can't just walk into a convenience store and buy a comic book off the Hey Kids Comics spinner rack because, comic books were more ubiquitous back in the day. Everybody had comic books because you could buy them anywhere. But anyway, according to Newsarama, who is citing a report from the NPD group, that comic book sales are up 6% in bookstore market in the past 12 months. And 37% of purchasers are women. So that's interesting. It pulls overall sales through Barnes & Noble, Target, and unspecified chain book retailers. I'm curious if Books A Million and Hastings was in on this, even though I know Hastings kind of went bye-bye in a lot of places. So anyway, it says the numbers have actual point of sale data from over 1,250 retailers, as well as receipts from others. So, as well as consumer surveys. So hopefully this data, is reliable. And they say that women account for 37% of sales, according to the survey. In terms of age group, 57% of buyers are in the 13 through 29 age groups. I'm guessing that maybe has gone down a little bit. And the split in that 57% of the 13 to 29 age group is 21% are women and 36% are men. So men are still buying more comic books than women, but women are buying a heck of a lot more comic books than they do now, or that they used to. Now, the manga subsection, which I personally kind of don't consider a comic book. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's almost completely a different kind of thing, and it appeals to kind of a different crowd usually. The manga subsection skews even more to younger readers, which doesn't surprise me. 76% of its buyers being 13 through 29. And it's the manga subcategory says that sales overall in this category have been up for the past 3 years, making it one of the highest growth categories in trade book marketplace, which, if you go into Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or wherever, there's entire sections devoted to manga trades. So there you go. And this, just to be clear, this doesn't apply to like if you go into your comic book store. This is data from like chain retailers and stuff like that. It doesn't sound like it's comic book store owner sales. So, but anyway, it's encouraging, to see that, comic book sales in general are up, comic books and graphic novels. So it's not just the trade scene. It's, it's comic books in general. So that's good. I imagine that a lot of the listeners like me love comic books, and we get tired always. The industry, it's going to implode, and no, it's not. It'll just find different ways to, get out there. So anyway, and I still think, as much as I love my local friendly comic book store owner, I would like to see both comic book stores, and then also I'd like to see comic books make it back into more, general. Like I would love to see comic books in convenience stores, and the price to come down. But that's a discussion for another day. So awkwardly segueing from comic books to Star Trek, I have a couple of Star Trek related news items for you here. The first one is that Star Trek Continues Episode 10 To Boldly Go Part 1 is now out. You can catch it on YouTube. And this is the first of the two-parter that is going to wrap Star Trek Continues, the fan film effort. We've had cast members from the show on before. They love what they do. They put out good stuff. And the original goal was to basically tell the fourth season of the original series of Star Trek. So when they finish the next episode, they're like, okay, we're done. We've told what would have been, in our creativity, the fourth season of Star Trek, the original series. And I think they ended up dropping a couple of episodes. I think they were going to go a couple of episodes further than this, but they decided to wrap at episode 11. And I think partially was because of the fan film guidelines, but I don't think that was the only reason. But anyway, we wish them well. They put out good stuff. And I'm debating, like, do I want to watch part 1 now, or do I want to wait till part 2 comes out and watch them both? But I'll probably go ahead and watch part 1 as soon as I can find the time to do so. And part 2, To Boldly Go Part 2, I believe comes out around November 23rd, if I remember correctly from what I read. Now, this is kind of interesting. According to Netflix, and this story is courtesy of the Nerdist. According to Netflix, which Star Trek episodes are the most rewatched? And I have to admit, this list did not look like what I thought it would. And the Nerdist even gives a little bit of analysis or, speculation on why after they present the list. So I will discuss that a little bit too. But it's Netflix reveals which Star Trek episodes are most rewatched, and it's not going to be the ones you think. I can almost guarantee it. So we'll go through these briefly. Number 1 is, I wonder if I should count down from number 10. Yeah, let's count down from number 10. That'll give it more drama, and we got to have the drama. So number 10 was the episode Clues, which was the Next Generation episode, season 4, episode 14. Number 9, Time and Again, which was Voyager, season 1, episode 3. Q Who? That was number 8, The Next Generation, season 2, episode 16. Dark Frontier, parts 1 and 2. That's Voyager, season 5, episode 15. Number 6 is The Gift. That's from Voyager, season 4, episode 2. Seeing a pattern here. Is a lot more Voyager than you might expect. Number 5, Scorpion, part 2, which is Voyager, season 4, episode 1. And then number 4 is Scorpion, part 1, which is Voyager, season 3, episode 26. So looks like they carried over a two-parter, maybe like a cliffhanger getting to the next season. And then number 3 is The Best of Both Worlds, part 2, which is The Next Generation, season 4, episode 1. And then The Best of Both Worlds, part 1 is the second most rewatched episode of Netflix. That's The Next Generation, season 3, episode 26. So again, they did a two-parter across seasons, kind of a cliffhanger thing. And then finally, that's the most terrible drum roll in history. The most rewatched Star Trek episode on Netflix is Endgame, parts 1 and 2, which was Voyager, season 7, episode 24. So here's that surprises me. I definitely assumed there would be more Next Generation and more the original series. I don't see any Deep Space Nine in here. I'm not surprised that, Enterprise didn't make any in here because although I thought that Enterprise was a solid series, it's definitely not, known as a fan favorite among the different series that are out there. It's possible that I guess, I don't even know if Deep Space Nine is on Netflix or not, because that really surprises me that Deep Space Nine did not get, because everyone's always talking about how Deep Space Nine is like the best show in history, as far as Star Trek. So I'm really surprised that it didn't make this list. But the analysis from the Nerdist is that their theory as to why the original series, The Next Generation, are not so well represented in the rewatch list is because the original show and The Next Generation have excellent upgraded to high-def Blu-rays. So while neither Voyager or Deep Space Nine have ever been given a high-definition upgrade. So if you're a hardcore Trekkie, it's saying you'll watch your original series or next-gen Blu-rays before you watch a more compressed streaming version. I don't know. Possibly. That does surprise me. I mean, if I can watch something streaming that I have access to, I'm not going to go through the hassle of busting out a disc. But anyway, there's the list. So whether you agree with it or not, that's what that's what Netflix is saying. And like, again, I'm surprised that Deep Space Nine isn't in there. So possibly, I don't know, man. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe Deep Space Nine isn't on Netflix. I don't know. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, got a few more news items, and then we've got an interview with Douglas Cole. And then later in the show, we're gonna have some audio of J.R.R. Tolkien reading his very own work. He's going to be reading a portion of the Riddles in the Dark section from The Hobbit. So stay tuned right here on Shane Plays Geek Talk, and we will be back with more right after this short break. Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today.
The die is cast.
Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Trollord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions, Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or Trollord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays. And we're back on Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. Remember, there's a temporary station change through November 11th due to Ouachita Baptist football. So I'm broadcasting live on Saturdays at 99.5 Faith Talk, and then we're rebroadcasting on my home station of 96.5 FM The Answer at 5 p.m. on Sundays. And then, of course, the show also goes out as a podcast and on Krypton Radio. But moving right along, we're having an all-you-can-geek buffet today. Got a lot of news items, And then we're going to have an interview with RPG designer Douglas Cole, a brief interview. And then after that, we're going to hear from J.R.R. Tolkien himself. So jumping right in there, the Star Wars Han Solo movie now has an official name. And it's a bit underwhelming, in my opinion, and many others. It's just simply Solo, a Star Wars story. So maybe they're playing it safe. I don't know. It just doesn't punch. Maybe it'll grow on me. It is using a Star Wars story kind of thing, just like Rogue One did. And I got, I have reservations on this one. As I've said before, the more Star Wars movies they put out, the less of an amazing event it becomes. But perhaps it's just inevitable that we get to this point. And I just don't feel necessarily that we need some characters. I think are more interesting when we don't know every little thing about their backstory. We know he's a scoundrel. We know he was a smuggler. We know that he's, at one point, he saved Chewbacca. So he got a life debt from Chewbacca, so I don't know. I'd prefer to fill it in myself, but we'll see. I mean, obviously I'll watch it. It's Star Wars. I love Star Wars. So they also said that, I guess Ron Howard is the one that made the announcement. And this news item is via TechCrunch. Ron Howard, the director who was brought in when the other directors got fired, evidently, because there were creative differences or whatever, said that, primary shooting on the movie has wrapped and it'll go into editing and it'll be out on May 25th, 2018. So there we go. That's the current Star Wars news. And I don't have a specific news item on this, but if you haven't heard, J.J. Abrams is going to be writing and directing Star Wars 9 to finish out, the new trilogy. All right. Couple of zombie news items here, to get you ready for Halloween coming up. So if you haven't heard, and if you're a Walking Dead fan, and especially if you're a Fear the Walking Dead and a Walking Dead fan, you'll be excited to hear that there is a crossover planned between the two shows. This article is courtesy of Deadline.com. So the worlds of The Walking Dead and spinoff Fear the Walking Dead are finally going to cross paths. So at the recent New York Comic-Con, Robert Kirkman himself said, and boy, this is a lesson in how to give information out while being as generic and vague as possible. There is one character that is going to go from one show that I will not name to another show that I will not name. Kirkman told the crowd of what has been a question since fans have asked since the prequel of sorts, Fear the Walking Dead, debuted in the summer of 2015. So that's basically what they're saying. One character is going from one show to another show. Now, the way I'm reading this is that that's going to be a permanent change, and I would imagine that they're going to take a character from The Walking Dead and move them over to Fear the Walking Dead because, The Walking Dead obviously has more ratings, higher ratings. So they probably want to get some of that going on Fear the Walking Dead, but we'll see. Maybe it's a temporary thing. I don't know. But that has a lot of people excited. I watched the first 2 seasons, I think, of Fear the Walking Dead and kind of stopped watching it, but I hear it's gaining steam and more people are getting into it, while The Walking Dead itself is still like the highest rated show on TV. And season 8 debuts with episode 100 on October 22nd. So this weekend, if you happen to be listening, on October 21st or 22nd via the radio. So also, we would not have The Walking Dead, or even Fear the Walking Dead, without a certain movie called Night of the Living Dead. And that is where director George Romero completely redefined zombie, because before that, zombie was like a voodoo reanimated corpse that would, was mindless and would just do whatever its master told it to do. And then along came in 1968, Night of the Living Dead, where you have the dead rising out of graves kind of on their own and wanting to eat people. So there's been all these things have come out of this zombie genre. And it can all be traced back to Night of the Living Dead in 1968. But there's an interesting reason why it became so popular and became so much part of pop culture and helped lead to all these other things that we've gotten. with flesh-eating zombies. And you got Shaun of the Dead. You got the scene in Michael Jackson's Thriller. You got The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead. There's been so many zombie movies and things based on this style of zombie. And the reason it got so popular and got into pop culture is because when they released it, the distributor forgot to put a copyright indicator because it changed the title from Night of the Flesh Eaters to Night of the Living Dead. And when they did that, they forgot to put a copyright indicator on that. And according to the copyright law at the time, leaving off the symbol in the year meant that it entered the public domain. So at that point, theaters, video stores, and TV stations could air it at no cost. I guess maybe video stores could sell tapes of it at no cost. I don't know, but so you could air it. It didn't cost anything. Now, copyright law has changed after that, and that wouldn't happen now. But because of that, zombies became a thing that could easily be exploited by other creators. So, originally, had it not entered the public domain, Romero's copyright hold on the film and the concept would have lasted through 2024. So due to a mistake is one of the reasons, a big reason, in fact, why Night of the Living Dead became so popular and why, it's led to where it is with zombies in popular culture now. And finally, in video game news, according to GameSpot, the game Cuphead, which is a really cool kind of action platformer game, twitchy game in the style of old 1930s cartoons, has sold over 1 million copies already on PC and Xbox One. And on top of that, it's evidently extremely difficult. But if you haven't seen this game Cuphead, at least go check out the video, find some videos of it or watch it just for its style. It's just really amazing to look at, really well done, the aesthetic. And I remember when they showed this at Microsoft's E3 conference in 2014, I remember noticing this game and it getting some buzz. So, they had to work on it for a few more years, put it out, and not only it's selling like hotcakes, but it's also evidently incredibly difficult. So that's the news. Coming up now, I've got a short interview with RPG designer Douglas Cole of Gaming Ballistic. He's got a Kickstarter out there that I wanted to let him talk about briefly. And if you'll remember, Douglas was on the show a few months back talking about his dungeon grappling rule system that he was working on. And this adventure that he's kickstarting can use or not use those dungeon grappling rules. So anyway, with no further ado, here's Douglas to tell us about the Lost Hall of Tyr. All right, so here we are with Douglas Cole of Gaming Ballistic back on the show. Last time we talked with this game designer, an entrepreneur, burgeoning entrepreneur, doing your own.
Burgeoning entrepreneur.
Yeah, burgeoning entrepreneur. You were kickstarting Dungeon Grappling, which I actually supported that Kickstarter and got my copy. And I think it's a great rule system for adding, really deep, rich grappling rules to, a variety of fantasy role-playing game systems. And now you have a Kickstarter that I think you're doing an adventure that I guess takes advantage of those rules if people want to use them, but they don't have to. And okay. Yeah. So go ahead and tell us about it.
That's right. Yeah. So it's called Lost Hall of Tyr, Tyr, the Norse god of law, war, and justice. And really what it is, it started life as a demonstration scenario at Gen Con 50. Called the Grappling Smackdown. And rather than just plunk people into the middle of an arena combat and say, hey, go grapple, I created a short, fairly linear, call it a side quest. However, because it was based on the Dragon Heresy world, that for the full role-playing game that is perpetually in development, it seems. But no, it's coming along, but it's got a nice world and a nice background. And so by setting it there, I could draw from the mythology of that world and make it more compelling. So it's a bit of a side quest to find the Lost Hall of Tyr, where he would meet and discuss law and judgment. And it was a conference center, so to speak, but it was hidden by glamour. by the power of the gods, so that only the worthy could find it, so to speak, and those who had a key, so to the thing. So it's basically a side quest. The keys were lost and then they were found, and the players, for various reasons, are the ones that need to go look. And so it's part wilderness adventure, part outdoor encounter, and a couple of surprises thrown in as well. There's some physical challenges. There's a puzzle or two. And so it's a nice broad scope little scenario. But one of the things that's in there is it does fully support dungeon grappling. Now, you can run it without it. I think that no one should, because, the grappling rules are pretty good, and they added dimension to combat and conflict that has proved to be a lot of fun. But every creature has dungeon grappling stats pre-recorded, and it's got a 2-page dungeon grappling quick start where I've condensed all of the necessary rather than optional components to dungeon grappling into 2 pages for 5th edition at the end of the book.
Nice. Okay, so looking at the Kickstarter, and again, it's Lost Hall of Tyr, a 5e adventure. So it looks like it's designed for 5th edition specifically, or can it be adapted to other rule systems fairly easily?
It certainly could be. One of the stretch goals that I'm actually going to pull in. I had thought that the appeal of an adventure for 5th edition would be wider than it was, but I think people are really looking for official D&D products. It has funded. It's heading towards the first stretch goal, which is going to an alternate printer rather than through drive-through, because I found one that is just got a bit better quality. The bindings are better. The colors are more vivid. And honestly, they're less expensive. So that's a win all around. So what I'm going to do, though, is pull in I'm going to convert the adventure to Swords and Wizardry. And I'm also going to speak with Alex McChris and convert it to Adventure Conqueror King. But with that, I'm going to pull those stretch goals in so that they're, closer to $5,000 or $6,000 than $8,000. And that will pull in some of the others. But it is still, we have funded, but it is still a little bit to go to where there's everything that I really wanted to do with the book. Because really, we've got maps, right? I mean, Dan Roy of Bogey Maps has done 6 encounter maps for me. And right now, we have those as art, right? So we've got full-size maps in the back of the book, and we've got sections of those maps so that the game master can talk about what the terrain is as he describes the encounter. But I would rather those interior art images not be maps. I would rather them be cool illustrations of something that has to do with the scene at hand.
Right.
But that increases the budget. The most expensive part of any project of the kind that I'm doing is the art. And I should say, it is written. I mean, the thing is done. It was play tested at Gen Con. It is edited. John Adamus turned the thing around a long time ago, and that was the version that went to Todd for layout to pour it into the forum. So, the preview images that you see on the Kickstarter page, those aren't mock-ups. That's the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
That is what you see in the book. The thing is done. What I'm trying to do is make it pretty.
Yeah, no, just what's already there looks good. And I can attest that, and I mean, it's good on its own. I don't mean this as a, backhanded compliment. Dungeon grappling was in and of itself a quality product. It looked good. But considering that was your first product that you put out, it was even more impressive. So encourage people to go check out the Kickstarter. I'll give them a little bit of an idea here. You can, for $7, you can get a PDF of the finished project and links to full-size maps that can be imported into a virtual tabletop of people's choice. They also get their name listed as a sponsor. And then for $20 or more, you'll get both a PDF and a physical copy of the adventure. And then after that, I think you have a retail level for retailers. But then after that, it's all about the art. I would encourage people again to go check it out. It's Lost Hall of Tyr. That's TYR. And it is, it's a adventure module that can use, but doesn't have to. It's up to the individual, group. But I would encourage people to use dungeon grappling because the dungeon grappling rules are really cool. And as I've said before, I love 5th edition, but one of my complaints is the grappling rules are woefully inadequate. Wanted to ask you one other thing, Douglas. What was the once everything got out, once you got it kickstarted and printed and out to people, what has been the response on dungeon grappling?
It's been pretty good. It's one of those things where, so I guess from a business perspective, it's in the black, right? So I basically broke even on Kickstarter. I did purchase a bunch of inventory. I've made up for that purchase and made a few $100 total. So from that perspective, for a first project, for a small project, it's been good, and it continues to have some long tail. Yeah. So, and that was one of the things that I was really thinking is that the people who picked up the book, the people who would back Dungeon Grappling, which is probably about 500 people by now. Those people who have done that, I think will like Lost Hall because it's direct support for the rules at a level that is not intrusive. Not every encounter is a grappling encounter. Right.
And it has, I want to mention again, or I don't know if I want to mention again, I want to make sure to mention that there is a dungeon grappling quick start in this adventure, according to the Kickstarter. You also get a bestiary, and you've got some content on there on wilderness travel. Just, how to how to make that fun. So, all right, man, it's been great talking to you. And folks, it is, let's see, October 30th at 10 p.m. You have till then to go support this cool 5th edition adventure. So, all right, Doug, well, it's been a pleasure talking with you again, and we will catch you next time.
All right. Thank you very much, Shane.
You're welcome. All right. All right, and that was Douglas Cole telling us about the Lost Hall of Tyr, his Kickstarter. I'm going to take us to another break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap the show with J.R.R. Tolkien reading us some of his own works in his own words. When we come back on Shane Plays Geek Talk.
Some goblins are your friends. Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at gamegoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or gamegoblins.com. Conveniently located at 1121 South Bowman, right on the corner of Bowman and Canis in West Little Rock, and staffed by friendly employees, Game Goblins has expanded their store size, and there's plenty of room for exciting inventory and tables for play space. You'll like that space because Game Goblins has gaming events every day of the week. For all of your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers, mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at gamegoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or gamegoblins.com. Tell them Shane Plays sent you.
Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. We're having an all-you-can-geek buffet today. We've had an interview with RPG designer Douglas Cole about his Lost Hall of Tyr Kickstarter, and then we've had a plethora, if you will, of geek news. And now to finish off the show, wanted to play this for you. This is just really, I love this. It's J.R.R. Tolkien, of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings fame, reading an excerpt from Riddles in the Dark from The Hobbit. Evidently, I guess he used to love to record himself on a tape recorder. And this, like in the 50s. So this is an excerpt from that, and I hope you enjoy it.
Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes. He had a boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out of his pale lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin, he thought, good, when he could get it. But he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if ever they came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further, so there their road ended in that direction. There was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from the distance with his pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island while Bilbo was sitting on the brink, altogether flummoxed and at the end of his way in his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum, and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least a tasty morsel it'll make us Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, through never having anyone else to speak to. That is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. "I'm Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I've lost the dwarves, and I've lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am. And I don't want to know if only I can get away." "What's he got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "The sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin," said Gollum, and became quite polite. "Perhaps she sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps, does it? Does it?" He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them, sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he'd ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago before the goblins came, and he was cut off from his friends far under the mountains. "Very well," said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. "You ask first," he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed, "What has roots as nobody sees? He's taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows." "Easy," said Bilbo. "Mountain, I suppose." "Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes?" "All right," said Bilbo, not daring to disagree and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. "There are 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still." That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. "Chestnuts, chestnuts," he hissed. "Teeth, teeth, my precious, but we is only 6. Then he asked his second. "Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters." "Half a moment," cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. "Wind, wind, of course," he said, and he was so pleased that he made one up on the spot. This would puzzle the nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in a low place, not in a high place, said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time, and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was getting impatient, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he had lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river. My precious, he said, sun on the daisies, it means it does. But these ordinary above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry. So this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all round him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside his head, he asked, to gain time, until he could think of a really hard one. This he thought a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some while, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you're making. Give us a chance. Let it give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo, after giving him a long chance. What is it? But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under the river, teaching his grandmother to suck eggs as it is. Then he asked, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. He also, in his turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer.
Okay, and again, that was J.R.R. Tolkien, in his own words, talking to a tape recorder, recording his reading of an excerpt of Riddles in the Dark from the original Hobbit, which is just a classic scene in fantasy literature. Now, to wrap up the show, next week, remember, we're going to have Star Trek Discovery and the Orville. We're going to be talking about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts about both at Shane Plays on Twitter. And finally, I can't do this. I can't end the show without the bad joke of the week. So here we go. Are you ready? All right. Why is camping so much fun? Because it's intense. Oh, hi-oh. All right. We'll catch you next time on Shane Plays Geek Talk. Have a great week.
You have done well. We are satisfied. You should try power of invisible.
Good luck. Powers of invisibility? What? What? How do you do it? What powers of invisibility? I lost the instruction book. Wait, don't go.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.